Look, I'm not saying I'm prejudiced. That would be unprofessional for someone of my standing in the Galactic Academy. But when they told us a human was joining advanced fleet tactics, I laughed so hard my secondary breathing sacs nearly ruptured. Human, in advanced fleet tactics. You have to understand. I, Commander Zal-Hav-X, have spent 27 cycles teaching the finest strategic minds in the Confederation. My students command battlecruisers and coordinate defense grids across 12-star systems. And they wanted me to teach a squishy, fragile creature from a backwater gravity well that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Please. They are sending us a Deathworlder, Admiral Pex told me during our faculty meeting. A diplomatic initiative, trying to bring humans into the fold. Wonderful, I said, antennae twitching with sarcasm. Let's invite the primitive apex predators to learn our most advanced battle techniques. What could possibly go wrong? The Admiral's facial ridges flushed azure with annoyance. The human female scored exceptionally well on the entrance exams. Of course she did, I replied. They are crafty, these humans. Predator instinct. They see patterns where none exist. Doesn't mean she can grasp the subtleties of 13-dimensional warfare. She will be in your class tomorrow, Pex said, ignoring my objections. Make it work. And that's how I ended up staring at this bizarre alien sitting in the back row of my lecture hall. The human looked absurdly vulnerable among my regular students, a collection of the Confederation's most promising tactical officers from 17 different species. The human called herself Maya Watson, approximately 1.7 meters tall, with a shockingly exposed epidermis except for the peculiar fur patch on top of her skull, colored an unremarkable brown. No protective chitin, no redundant organs, no enhanced sensory apparatus. Just two inadequate eyes, ridiculously placed at the front of her head like some sort of prey animal. Yet, paradoxically, from a predator world. The irony wasn't lost on me. Good morning, cadets, I began, my voice reverberating through the amphitheater. Today we begin our unit on asymmetric fleet engagement. Who can tell me the three primary vulnerabilities of a standardized Johnny battle formation? 6 appendages shot up immediately. The human's hand remained down, her eyes fixed on her datapad with unnerving intensity. Commander Thrix, I acknowledged a promising Volucrid student. Superior firepower from unexpected vectors, subspace distortion fields disrupting formation cohesion, and psychological warfare targeting hierarchical communication structures. Thrix answered promptly. Adequate, I said, enjoying the way his feathery crest deflated slightly. Though I would argue psychological warfare is merely a subset of communication disruption. Anyone else? Another round of appendages. Still, the human remained silent. Was she even following the discussion? Her species' facial expressions were notoriously difficult to interpret. Perhaps our guest from Earth would like to contribute? I said, mandibles clicking with barely disguised contempt. Ms. Watson, do you have anything to add about Johnny battle formations? The lecture hall went quiet. 23 students turned to stare at the human. She looked up, her peculiar lips forming what I later learned was called a smile. Not a threat display as I initially assumed. The Johnny formations have a 4th vulnerability, Commander, she said, her voice surprisingly confident. Time. I blinked all 4 of my eyes simultaneously. Elaborate. The Johnny developed their battle doctrine during the 3-moon conflict when engagement distances were limited by primitive sensor technology, she explained. Their formations assume weapons fire will occur within light-second ranges. Any opponent who can force a protracted engagement beyond conventional parameters will create increasing disorder in their response patterns. Their hierarchical command structure becomes exponentially less efficient as decision cycles expand. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The information was correct, but it wasn't in any of the assigned readings. Even I had only mentioned it briefly in my latest scholarly publication. You have done some supplementary research, I see, I said, trying to sound unimpressed. I read your paper on temporal asymmetry in combat operations, Commander, she replied. Fascinating application of chaos theory to biological response mechanisms. I felt my scales flush with mild embarrassment. Perhaps I had underestimated this creature. Well, yes, that's correct, I admitted. Time is indeed the fourth vulnerability. I quickly moved on, but found myself watching the human more carefully throughout the lecture. She took minimal notes, asked no further questions, but her eyes missed nothing. Disturbing, really, how those predator eyes tracked every movement. Over the next 4 weeks, the human continued to surprise me. Her understanding of three-dimensional tactics was rudimentary at first, hardly surprising for a species that had evolved on a flat plane and had only recently ventured into space. But she learned with alarming speed. "She's not even using a neural enhancer, my teaching assistant Drix observed one day. All organic processing." Primitive, I sniffed, though privately I was becoming concerned. The human completed her tactical simulations with increasing efficiency, often employing unorthodox approaches that violated established doctrine yet somehow succeeded. When we began the section on swarm tactics, she submitted a response paper that was so innovative I immediately classified it and sent a copy to Confederation Defense Command. Her suggestions about micro-jumps coordinated across dispersed autonomous units were troubling, especially coming from a species we were still evaluating for full membership. On the 42nd day of instruction, I announced the final examination, a full battle simulation against an unknown adversary, with each student commanding a mock fleet of identical composition. You will be graded on efficiency, casualties sustained, objective completion, and tactical innovation, I explained. The simulation will run for 3 standard days. Your opponent will adapt to your tactics in real time, requiring constant adjustment to your strategy. "Will we be facing each other?" asked Gorn, a hulking Taurid with an impressive record in previous simulations. "No," I replied. "You will all face the same opponent, me." A ripple of dismay spread through the class. In 27 years, no student had ever defeated my simulation persona. It was a point of personal pride. "The simulation begins tomorrow," I continued. "You have until then to prepare your initial deployments." Dismissed. As the students filed out, I noticed the human lingering, studying the tactical display at the front of the room. "A question, MS Watson?" I asked. "Just wondering about the simulation parameters, Commander," she said. "Will we have full control over our fleet components?" "Within reasonable limits," I replied. "You cannot, for instance, order your ships to self-destruct without tactical justification." "And how is tactical justification determined?" she asked. Those unsettling eyes focused intently on mine. "By the simulation parameters and my judgment," I said, suddenly uncomfortable under her gaze. "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to understand the rules," she said with another one of those smiles. "In my experience, understanding the rules is half the battle." "Indeed," I said, watching her leave with a growing sense of unease. The simulation began the next morning. 24 students, 24 identical fleets, facing my tactical persona across a standardized battlefield. The scenario was challenging but fair. They needed to capture a heavily defended space station while preserving civilian infrastructure and minimizing their own casualties. Most students followed variations of established doctrine. Gorn executed a textbook Taurid hammer and anvil approach. Thrix employed elegant Volucrid swarm tactics. The Johnny students predictably used their species' famous battle wedge configurations. The human did nothing. For 6 hours, her fleet sat motionless at its starting position, well outside my defensive perimeter. Sensors active, but weapons cold. No probing attacks, no reconnaissance drones, no attempted communications. But nothing. Nothing. MS Watson, I called across the simulation chamber. "What? Is your control interface functioning properly?" "Perfectly, Commander," she replied without looking up from her console. "I'm observing." Observing? While the other students were already engaging, suffering casualties but making incremental progress, the human simply watched. By the end of the first day, 3 students had already failed, their fleets destroyed by my defenses. The rest were struggling, adapting their tactics with varying degrees of success. The human's fleet hadn't moved an inch. A most unusual strategy, Drix commented as we reviewed the day's results. Perhaps she doesn't understand the simulation. Perhaps, I said, though I doubted it. There was something calculating in those predator eyes that made my scales itch. On the second day, the human finally moved, but not toward the objective. Instead, her fleet split into tiny groups of 2 or 3 ships and began executing seemingly random micro-jumps throughout the outer reaches of the system. My defensive algorithms registered them as minimal threats and largely ignored them. Meanwhile, the human continued to observe the ongoing battles between my forces and the other students' fleets. By midday, 14 students had failed the simulation. 8 were still fighting with diminishing chances of success. And the human was up to something, but I couldn't determine what. She's mapping your response patterns, Drix suggested as we watched her scattered ships continue their erratic jumps, learning how your defensive algorithms prioritize threats. Impossible, I said. My tactical persona uses quantum randomization protocols. There is no pattern to map. But as the second day drew to a close, I wasn't so certain. The human's scattered ships had now performed over 3,000 micro-jumps, each seemingly random. Yet when I analyzed their positions over time, uncomfortable patterns began to emerge. She was systematically probing my defensive grid, testing response times, commitment thresholds, and priority assignments. No conventional tactical doctrine would suggest such an approach. It was inefficient, time-consuming, and exposed her ships to potential isolation and destruction. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that she was seeing something I wasn't. By the morning of the third day, only 3 students remained in the simulation besides the human, Gorn, Thrix, and a surprisingly tenacious Frisian named Jipik. Their fleets were battered but still combat effective, and each had made modest progress toward the objective. The human suddenly recalled all her ships, bringing them back to their starting position. After 48 hours of scattered micro-jumps, she was back where she began. Had she given up? "Ms. Watson," I called out, unable to contain my curiosity. "You have 12 hours remaining to complete the objective." She looked up at me with those unsettling eyes and said, "That should be sufficient, Commander?" And then she did something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. She divided her fleet into 26 exactly equal groups and launched them simultaneously in different directions, none heading toward the objective. Each group accelerated to maximum velocity, then executed precisely timed jumps that seemed to follow no logical pattern. "What is she doing?" Drix wondered aloud. I shook my head, mandibles twitching with confusion. Whatever she was attempting violated every principle of unified fleet operations I had taught. And yet, something about the timing of those jumps tickled my tactical instincts. There was a pattern here, a method to this apparent madness, but I couldn't quite grasp it. 3 hours later, Gorn's fleet was destroyed in a valiant but ultimately doomed frontal assault. Thrix followed an hour after that, his swarm tactics elegantly executed but insufficient against my defenses. Jipik's fleet lingered on the edges, making occasional probing attacks but clearly stalling for time. The human's scattered fleet continued its bizarre dance of jumps and vector changes. With just 4 hours remaining, not a single one of her ships had fired a weapon or come within engagement range of the objective. And then, as if triggered by some invisible signal, all 26 groups simultaneously changed course and began new jump patterns. That's when I saw it. Too late. "Gravitational resonance cascade," I whispered, suddenly understanding. "She's creating a system-wide gravitational wave pattern." Drix looked alarmed. "But that's not possible with conventional drives." "It is if you precisely coordinate hundreds of micro-jumps over time," I said, watching with growing astonishment as my simulation's physics engine began registering subspace distortions throughout the battle area. She mapped the entire system's gravitational topography and is exploiting harmonic frequencies to create constructive interference patterns. "To what end?" Drix asked. I was about to answer when my defensive grid suddenly went haywire. Sensors reported phantom contacts by the thousands, communication channels filled with cascading error messages, targeting systems recalibrated frantically against non-existent threats. In the midst of this chaos, the human finally spoke. "Commander," she said calmly, "I believe your defense grid is experiencing some technical difficulties. System-wide sensor anomalies detected," reported the simulation's automated voice. "The defense grid operating at 37% efficiency. Unknown subspace interference pattern detected." I stared at my tactical display in disbelief. The carefully constructed defense network I had refined over 27 years of teaching was coming apart like a poorly woven membrane. And the human had done it without firing a single shot. "It's a fascinating approach," Drix muttered beside me. "She's weaponized physics itself." I shot him a withering glare. "This is not the time for admiration." Around us, the remaining students watched in stunned silence as Maya Watson's fleet suddenly converged from 26 different vectors, moving with perfect coordination through the gaps in my now disorganized defenses. "How is she coordinating them so precisely?" I demanded. "The gravitational distortions should be affecting her communication systems too." "Unless she pre-programmed each ship's movement sequence," Drix suggested. "If she mapped the gravitational topography thoroughly enough during those first 2 days." "Impossible," I snapped. "The computational requirements would be substantial." The human interrupted from across the room. She hadn't even looked up from her console. "But not impossible. I ran the calculations overnight." "Overnight?" My mandibles clicked in agitation. While other species required neural enhancers and quantum processing arrays, this primitive creature had apparently performed complex 11-dimensional physics calculations using only her organic brain while her body was in its bizarre daily hibernation state. How terrifying. "Commander," Jipik called out, the last remaining student besides the human, "request permission to alter my approach in response to changing battlefield conditions." "Granted," I replied automatically, still fixated on the human strategy. Jipik, ever the opportunist, immediately directed his remaining ships to follow in the wake of Watson's fleet, exploiting the safe corridors she had created through my defensive grid. Smart move. I would have awarded extra points for adaptability if I hadn't been so preoccupied with the unfolding catastrophe. Watson's fleet, now formed into an unconventional spherical formation, pushed steadily toward the objective station. My defensive systems, still reeling from the gravitational disruptions, responded sluggishly. Targeting computers struggled to get locks. Point defense batteries fired at sensor ghosts. Communication between defensive nodes degraded to near uselessness. "She's created artificial weather," I realized aloud. "She's turned the battlefield itself into a weapon." "An entirely original approach," Drix agreed. "No established tactical doctrine includes gravitational manipulation as a primary vector of attack, because it's absurdly inefficient," I growled. "The energy expenditure alone should have drained her fleet's reserves. The precision timing required should be beyond the capabilities of standard navigation computers." And yet Drix gestured at the display where the human's fleet continued its inexorable advance. My tactical persona, following its programming, attempted to adapt. It concentrated remaining functional units to intercept the human's main force, a logical response under normal circumstances, but exactly what she had anticipated. As soon as my defenses began to consolidate, her fleet executed another precisely coordinated maneuver. The spherical formation inverted itself, ships passing through carefully calculated points in space-time that amplified the already existing gravitational distortions. The effect was devastating. Localized subspace ruptures bloomed across my defensive line. Simulated ships lost propulsion, weapons systems went offline, and artificial gravity failed across entire sectors of the battlefield. "That shouldn't be possible," I whispered. "No," Drix agreed. "It shouldn't." The human finally looked up at me, those predator eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite identify. Victory? Amusement? Hard to tell with such alien features. Your simulation assumes standard physics models, Commander, she said. But gravity isn't just a force, it's geometry. If you understand the geometry well enough, you can reshape it. That's not in the curriculum, I protested weakly. No, she agreed. I learned it back on Earth. High school physics. High school? Their juvenile education included manipulating the fundamental forces of the universe. What kind of species? I didn't have time to complete the thought. Watson's fleet had reached the outer perimeter of the station. The remaining functional defensive units moved to intercept, but they were too few, too disorganized, and too late. Surrender the station, Watson transmitted to my tactical persona, and I will stabilize the gravitational field. My persona, recognizing the hopelessness of the situation, capitulated as its programming dictated when faced with overwhelming tactical disadvantage. Simulation objective achieved, announced the automated system. Time elapsed, 68 hours, 17 minutes, 4 seconds. Casualties sustained, 0. Civilian infrastructure preserved, 100%. Tactical innovation score, unprecedented. Final grade beyond established parameters. A stunned silence fell over the simulation chamber. 0 casualties? In 27 years of running this exercise, no student had ever achieved even 50% survival rates. The objective was designed to be achievable only through acceptable losses. Impossible, I muttered. Yet here we are, Drix replied quietly. Japik, who had cleverly ridden the human's wake, looked both impressed and dismayed. His fleet had reached the outer station perimeter just as Watson secured victory, earning him a respectable second-place finish. But being outshone so completely clearly stung his professional pride. Simulation complete, I announced, struggling to maintain my composure. MS Watson, an unorthodox approach. Thank you, Commander, she replied, powering down her console with maddening casualness. I considered a conventional attack, but the casualty projections were unacceptable. Casualties are an inevitable reality of warfare, I said stiffly. Are they? Those unsettling eyes fixed on mine. Or just an inevitable result of conventional thinking? Before I could formulate a suitably cutting response, Admiral Pex entered the simulation chamber. Evidently, word of the human's performance had spread quickly. Commander Zal have X, he greeted me, facial ridges flushed with excitement. I understand we have witnessed something extraordinary today. A lucky exploitation of a simulation parameter oversight, I said dismissively. In real combat, such a strategy would be impractical. The human spoke up. With respect, Commander, that's incorrect. The gravitational manipulation technique would work even better in actual space. Your simulation imposed limitations that made it more difficult, not less. I stared at her. Explain. Your physics engine simplifies quantum fluctuations in subspace to make the calculations manageable, she said with infuriating confidence. Real space-time is more responsive to harmonic resonance patterns. I had to overcompensate to achieve the same effect in your simulation. Admiral Pex's secondary eye stalk swiveled toward me. Is this accurate, Commander? I wanted to deny it, but academic integrity forced me to nod reluctantly. The simulation does employ certain computational shortcuts in quantum mechanics modeling. Fascinating. Pex turned to Watson. And you identified these shortcuts and compensated for them? In 3 days? 2 days of observation, 1 day of execution, she corrected. The pattern became clear once I had enough data points. Pex's mandibles quivered with barely contained excitement. MS Watson, the Confederation Defense Council would very much like to discuss your insights. This approach could revolutionize our understanding of spatial warfare. I felt my scales flush with alarm. Admiral, need I remind you that humans are not yet full members of the Confederation? Sharing advanced tactical innovations with them might be premature. Watson's lips twitched in that disturbing expression again. Actually, Commander, I believe I just shared our advanced tactical innovations with you. The implication hung in the air like a plasma charge ready to detonate. Had Earth's military already developed these techniques? Was this demonstration merely confirming capabilities they already possessed? The thought sent a cold ripple down my spine. "The Council will want your report immediately," Commander Peck said, ignoring my concerns entirely. "Ms. Watson, would you be willing to provide a detailed explanation of your methodology?" "Of course, Admiral," she replied pleasantly. Though I should mention this was just a basic application, my thesis at Earth's Tactical Institute explores much more complex implementations. More complex. My primary heart skipped a beat. What exactly had we invited into our academy? As the Admiral led Watson away for what would undoubtedly be a very thorough debriefing, Drix approached my station. "Are you all right, Commander? Your scales have turned an unusual shade of green." "Fine," I muttered. "Just processing implications." "She's quite remarkable," Drix observed. "To conceptualize a strategy no one in the Confederation has considered in 8,000 years of space warfare." "That's what concerns me," I admitted. "What does it say about humans that they approach problems so differently?" "Perhaps it's their evolutionary history," Drix suggested. "Apex predators from a high-gravity death world. They see patterns differently because they evolved hunting prey that was actively trying to avoid them. While most sentient species evolved from herd or colony organisms," I agreed reluctantly. "Cooperation rather than predation." "Precisely. Different evolutionary pressures, different cognitive approaches." Drix hesitated. "Commander, do you think the Confederation made a mistake admitting humans to the Academy?" I considered the question carefully, remembering the look in Watson's eyes when she explained her strategy. There had been no malice there, no aggression. Only the pure intellectual satisfaction of solving a complex problem elegantly. "No," I said finally, "not a mistake, but perhaps a more significant decision than we realized at the time." 3 days later, I found myself in the uncomfortable position of defending the humans' performance before the Academy Board of Governors. Several members had expressed concern that her unorthodox victory indicated a potential security risk. "The human demonstrated capabilities we did not anticipate," said Governor Vren, an ancient thoraxian whose exoskeleton had faded to a distinguished pale blue with age. "Some might consider this deception." "Not deception," I corrected, surprised to find myself advocating for the very creature I had initially dismissed. "Innovation." Ms. Watson simply approached the problem from a perspective we hadn't considered. "A dangerously unconventional perspective," observed Governor Call, mandibles clicking nervously. "Dangerous?" I permitted myself a short laugh. "Governor, her solution achieved total victory without casualties on either side. If anything, it's our conventional approaches that are dangerous, accepting losses as inevitable when they may not be." Admiral Pex, seated at the governor's right, flashed his approval ridges briefly at my defense. "Commander Zalhavex," Governor Vren leaned forward. "You have taught advanced fleet tactics for 27 cycles. In your professional assessment, what are the strategic implications of this human's performance?" I took a moment to organize my thoughts. My answer would likely shape Confederation policy toward humans for years to come. "Governors, I believe we are witnessing the emergence of a species that thinks fundamentally differently than any current Confederation member. This difference is neither superior nor inferior, merely distinct. Where we see obstacles, they see opportunities. Where we accept limitations, we seek alternatives. This cognitive divergence represents a potential renaissance in tactical thought." "Or a threat," interrupted Call. "Only if we make it one," I countered. The human's solution was elegant, non-destructive, and effective. She could have easily modified her approach to maximize enemy casualties rather than minimize them. She chose not to. I find that significant. The room fell silent as the governors processed my assessment. "What do you recommend, Commander?" Vren finally asked. "Accelerate human integration into Confederation defense structures," I said without hesitation. "Create joint tactical development initiatives. We'll learn from their perspective while they learn from ours. The synthesis could yield approaches neither would develop independently." "You have changed your tune considerably," Hex noted with obvious amusement. Weren't you the one who objected most strenuously to admitting the human to your class? My scales flushed with embarrassment. I was wrong, Admiral. I allowed preconception to cloud my judgment. A tactical error I will not repeat. 2 cycles later, the Confederation established the Joint Species Tactical Innovation Command. Its first director was a promising young graduate named Maya Watson. Its first senior advisor, much to my surprise, was myself. During our initial planning session, I finally asked the question that had been bothering me since the simulation. Ms. Watson, I said as we reviewed proposed research initiatives, your strategy in my class was brilliant, but you could have executed it much earlier. Why wait until the final hours? Those strange human eyes crinkled at the edges, an expression I now recognized as genuine amusement. 2 reasons, Commander, she replied. First, I needed comprehensive data on your defensive algorithm's response patterns. But that required patience. And the second reason? Her expression softened. The second reason is that I wanted to give my classmates a fair chance to succeed on their own terms before I disrupted the entire simulation. I stared at her, mandibles slack with surprise. You delayed your victory out of courtesy? Not exactly, she said. Considerate respect for different tactical traditions. I wanted to observe and learn from them, not simply override them. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about humans that no xenobiological study had captured. Yes, they were predators from a death world. Yes, they thought in patterns that sometimes alarmed us with their alien logic. But they were also capable of a form of empathy that transcended species boundaries. They didn't just see patterns we missed. They saw us in all our different forms and traditions, and they valued that diversity. Perhaps that, even more than their tactical innovations, was why the Academy Board had been right to accelerate their integration into the Confederation. I extended a formal greeting appendage to the human. Director Watson, I believe our collaboration will prove most enlightening. She took my appendage in her strange 5-digited grasping limb and applied gentle pressure, a human gesture of agreement I had learned. That's the plan, Commander? She said with that distinctive facial expression. That's definitely the plan. As we turned back to our work, I couldn't help but feel that the Confederation had just gained something far more valuable than a new tactical doctrine. We had gained a new perspective. And in the vastness of space, facing unknown threats from beyond the galactic rim, different perspectives might prove to be the most powerful weapons of all.